Hi, this is problem 11-2 from chapter 11, and it says that we should consider a country whose economic structure matches the assumptions of the classical model, and then suppose that businesses in this nation suddenly anticipate lower future profitability from investments they undertake today. And then it wants us to decide whether each of the things in the list it's going to give us increase, decrease, or have no effect. So the first thing it asks us about is the current equilibrium interest rate. But before we jump into that, let's review from the textbook what these assumptions of the classical model are. So this is page 243 of your text, and really you can read, I think on the next page, yes, on 244 you can read all the assumptions of the classical model, which are that pure competition exists, wages and prices are flexible, people are motivated by self-interest, and people can't be fooled by money illusion. And now money illusion just means that you would react to changes in prices rather than relative prices. So for example, inflation. You would think if you have money illusion, you would think that you have just gotten a raise at work, when really all you've gotten is a cost of living adjustment or a little bit of an inflation raise. So that's what money illusion would be. And so one of the assumptions is that people aren't fooled by that. So you can read more about these on page 244, but really, in my mind, the important thing that the classical model really boils down to is the very beginning here on page 243, when the book first starts to talk about the classical model, and that is Say's law. Say's law says that supply creates its own demand, and hence it follows that desired expenditures will equal actual expenditures. All that means to me, I boil it all down in my mind to the idea that everything that's created in an economy also gets used up. So just by the fact of supplying goods, we're also supplying jobs, which supplies people with the income they need to then consume those goods that have been supplied, and the cycle continues. And they're actually, your book shows a diagram of that cycle, I believe on the next page here. Yes. So figure 11-1 shows that pictorially. So we supply goods and services, which also gives people income. People use that income to generate a demand for those goods and services, which gives us a reason to need output, which then means we supply, we have income, we have demand, we have output. So it's a circular, cyclical sort of economy where there is no excess. Everything that's created gets used up. And everything, the other key here is that it's all driven by supply. So Say's law says that supply creates its own demand. That everything that happens in the economy is driven really by the fact that we're supplying stuff. So our whole GDP, the nation's entire income, economy, everything, it all boils down to what we're supplying. Okay, so that's really the gist of the classical model. Like I said, there are the nuts and bolts and sort of the little specifics that you can see in those 4 laws or 4 assumptions, and then you can read more in the text too. But really what it all boils down to is Say's law, that supply creates its own demand. Everything is run by or generated by, the whole economy depends on supply, and just by the act of supplying things, we're creating demand for those things. Okay, so let's keep that in mind and go back to look at our question. So in this economy that matches the assumptions of the classical model, we are to suppose that businesses in the nation suddenly anticipate lower future profitability from investments they undertake today. We want to know what that does to the things in the list. So the first thing in the list is current equilibrium interest rate. Okay, so if you read on in your textbook, you get to this discussion of the relationship, this is page 245, the relationship between savings and investment. And really, this all comes down to a graph here, figure 11-2, that looks a whole lot like supply and demand graphs that we've seen before. Really, this is just another supply and demand market. Savings versus investment. This is just how much money is available in the market to be invested. And the price of investment is the interest rate. Right? That makes sense. You know this from if you invest in any stocks or if you just have a savings account. The price of your savings account is whatever you're earning in interest. So we consider this is a market of supply and demand, where it just happens to be a special market where the quantity is the amount of investment or savings and the price is the interest rate. Okay? And so the supply, because we're dealing with a classical economy where, like I said, everything's sort of cyclical, so anything that's supplied is also used up and there's no excess, we consider savings to be the supply of money to be invested, right? And you can think about this as, why does your bank pay you to save money? The bank gives you interest because what they're doing with your money behind the scenes is turning around and investing that money. So any money you put into savings is money that banks put into investing, or firms, or so if you're saving your money by putting it into the stock market, those firms in which you're buying stock are then turning around and investing that money in capital or what have you in order to grow their businesses, right? So the amount of money that you save or that people save in the economy, consumers save, is really, we can think of that as the supply of money into an investment market. And on the flip side of that, our demand curve, so the downward sloping curve here, is the amount of money that we desire to invest. So the demand for investment. So desired saving is how much money we would like to put into the market to be invested, the supply of money into the investment market, and desired investment is the amount of money that investors would like to have to be able to invest. So this is like our demand for money to be invested in the investment market. So really, when it comes to savings and investment, we're just looking at a special case of a supply and demand market. So, and like I said, in that special case, the price in this special market is just our interest rate. How much does it cost to invest this money, or how much do I get from investing this money? So, back to our question where it asks us, suppose that businesses in the nation suddenly anticipate lower future profitability from investments they undertake today. Now, I can pull up my whiteboard here and draw our supply and demand model for our investment market, right? So I have savings and I have investment as my supply. This is the same thing as a supply curve, and this is the same thing as a demand curve, right? And over here I have interest as my price. Same thing we've been normally looking at as price. And as quantity we have an amount invested. Okay, so think about this exactly the way you think about the supply and demand markets that we've looked at before. If businesses, those who are doing the investing, suddenly believe that in the future they will have lower profitability from investments, what are they going to do? This is just like if you think about people think that the price of gasoline is going to go up tomorrow. What are they going to do? So, if they expect they're going to get less money back from their investments, they're going to start investing less, right? And this we see in the stock market. If something goes crazy in the Chinese stock market, then Americans start all of a sudden pulling their money out of the American stock market because they think that's bad news for the American stock market, right? So investors, if they believe that things are going to go bad tomorrow, they start pulling back and taking their investments out of the economy today. So what we're going to see is a shift leftward in investment. This is our new investment, so I'll call it I2, our new investment curve. It's going to shift down because they expect things to go wrong or go bad tomorrow. So now that we've drawn that out, we can see what happens to our new equilibrium interest rate. Okay, so our old interest rate before we suddenly thought we were going to do badly tomorrow was here. Our new interest rate is here. So our equilibrium interest rate goes down. And we can see that just by drawing the graph of our savings and investment market. So we'll say that the current equilibrium interest rate will decrease. There we go. What about the equilibrium real GDP today? Remember, this is a classical model where the only thing that affects today's GDP is today's supply. So it doesn't matter what is happening in the savings and investment world. If the supply of goods is not changing, then the current GDP is not going to change. When investments change today, supply of goods doesn't immediately change today, right? We know that. That sort of takes time to happen. So right now, the GDP is not going to change because of the classical model, GDP is determined completely by supply. Everything is determined really by supply. That's Say's law. And so if supply is not changing, and supply is not, the only thing that's changing here is investments. Supply of goods is not and services is not changing, so the GDP is also not going to change in a classical model. What about employment? We know from Say's law that anytime we're supplying goods, as long as that supply is not changing, we're also supplying employment. Remember, that was one of those things in that cycle, that by supplying the goods, we're supplying the income to the employees that allows them then to demand the goods. So as long as supply is not changing and GDP is not changing, we're not changing our total output in the economy, we're also not going to be changing the number of employees we have. So because we have a classical model where supply runs the world, as long as the only thing that's changing here is investment, and that's the only thing we're told that's changing, our equilibrium employment also doesn't change. What about our current equilibrium savings? If we go back over to our graph, we can see that the amount that is saved now is less than the amount that was saved before. So we can say that our current equilibrium savings does decrease. And lastly, it asks about the future equilibrium GDP. In the present, GDP is only determined by the supply. In the future, that GDP is going to be determined by the future supply. If investment goes down today, that means we're investing less in capital, which means tomorrow we'll have lower supply, which means our future GDP will go down. And that's it.